The anime started with, a common man opens his eyes, but he looks to be in great agony as tears fall from his eyes. He looks around to see people jeering and laughing at him. A prince decides to give him a parting gift before he takes his life. He asks the commoner to strike out with his magic, and the man desperately tries to attack the prince. He raises his arms to shoot a mighty flame at the prince, but he can only manage a weak flame that hardly causes damage to the prince. Everyone makes fun of his flimsy magic, and the prince can't believe there's a commoner that's so weak. He's disappointed that was all a commoner could manage. He recounts the words of a great sage called William Bordeaux, who said the most important things for a mage are lineage, talent, and intelligence, but he tells the commoner not to get the wrong idea, because diligence is a broader prerequisite and no amount of it can make up for a lack of talent. He begins preparing his attack as he tells the commoner that magic will never smile upon someone as insignificant as him. He releases his flame magic on the commoner, who's immediately consumed by them. He screams in agony as the flames burn him to ashes, and then he immediately begins to smile at the magnificence of a royalty's magic. He realizes the power behind the magic a noble wields, and he can't help but admire its beauty from his magical perspective. He wishes he learned more about magic and mastered it while he was alive. With his last breath, he prays for another chance to experience the thrill of such magic. He suddenly wakes up and he sees himself surrounded by maids holding toys. He wonders who they are and where he is. He thinks they are giant enemies, and he decides to protect himself. He tries to cast a fire spell to defend himself, but he realizes his hands are quite tiny. He accidentally casts a fire spell, which bursts through the roof of the castle as fireworks go off, marking his birth. A town cry runs through the kingdom, announcing the birth of the 7th prince of the Saloon Kingdom while sharing posters. Everyone in the village is happy to witness such a great day. Meanwhile, the maids of the castle are mind-blown by the disaster caused by the newborn baby. The baby smiles cheekily, proud of his handwork in the destruction of the castle. Some years later, the people in the kingdom go about their normal activities, while some maids search for the prince in the castle. They search a portion of the castle and can't find him, so they decide to move their search to another portion of the castle. The prince comes out of hiding after they leave, and he's about to sneak away from the castle when he's greeted by 2 men. Prince Lloyd stops in his tracks and he shushes the man so the maids don't hear them calling his name. He tells the man to deny seeing him, and the man agrees to keep his secret. He asks Lloyd if he'll like to tag along with them as they go to hunt, but Lloyd leaves him talking to himself. When the man realizes that Lloyd is trying to sneak away, he calls out to him, but Lloyd doesn't answer. The man is disappointed that the prince has run off again, but his friend informs him that Lloyd is the 7th prince, which makes him out of contention for the crown. He doesn't understand why the man is going through so much effort to gain his favor. The man reminds his friend that the prince was able to speak shortly after his birth, read spell books instead of children's picture books, and also refused breast milk like any gentleman would. He tells his friend he thinks the prince is a reincarnation of the great sage William Bordeaux. His friend tells him it's ridiculous to think the prince is a reincarnation of the great sage. The prince runs down the steps in the castle and he realizes the man is right about him being a reincarnation. He remembers he was a commoner in his past life, but he doesn't know why his memories are still intact. As the maids look for him in the castle, he wonders why he was reborn as someone privileged to be the 7th son of a royal family. Although he was born as royalty, he doesn't plan to follow their ambitions of glory. He decides to stick to his ambitions from his previous life and find out how much awesome magic can be discovered in the palace. He enters the royal library and he's excited to parse through all the magical books lining the shelves. He's amazed by the library's collection because it surpassed that of the Magic Academy in his previous life. He takes a book off the shelf and opens it up, but someone immediately appears behind him. Sylpha takes the book from his hands, pressed to find him after he ran away from the maids. They engage in swordplay and Lloyd is able to hold his own against her for a while, but she eventually pushes him back. He tells her he doesn't have a shot at the throne since he's the 7th, and he doesn't need sword instructions. Sylpha tells him there's more to life than succession to the throne. She reminds him that he has to be familiar with handling a sword as a member of the royal family. It was her purpose in life to make him adept with the sword after she was placed in charge of his education 3 years ago. Lloyd realizes that Sylpha won't let him stop training unless he puts up a good show. They decide to resume their sword practice and Sylpha realizes that Lloyd was getting stronger with each passing day. Lloyd wasn't bothered by her compliment because he knew she was holding back. He was also secretly using control-type magic to trace Sylpha's movements, so she was battling a mirror image of herself. He was basically cheating so he could get out of practice and go back to his books. They continue sparring, but Sylpha still gets the best out of him. Lloyd realizes that those Sylpha still surpassed him in arm strength, stamina, and height. Though he could copy her techniques, he was still at a disadvantage against her, which would make him lose. He decides to experiment, cheating to compensate for his disadvantages against her. He uses magic to increase his sword length and his physical strength. He also uses levitation to make up for the height difference. He re-engaged Sylpha, and this time he's able to keep up with her. He's confident he'll be able to win with his magic enhancements. They continue their sword practice, but Lloyd decides to use his trump card to make an unexpected move. He releases his trace magic, which mirrors Sylpha's movements, and he tries to strike her from behind. Sylpha looks surprised and Lloyd is happy he'll be able to get back to his book, but Sophia blocks his attack. She wonders if he was cheating, which catches him by surprise, and she's able to knock his sword out of his hands. She's surprised he thought she wouldn't notice his cheating schemes. She tells him he's so talented for trying to make up for his disadvantages. She's surprised he was able to use 2 spells at once, which most court magicians can't even manage. She tells him not to rush his growth, but to grow at his own pace. Lloyd realizes she didn't notice his physical enhancement and his control spells because he was actually using 4 spells at once. He decides to keep this information from her so she doesn't suss him out. Sylpha takes him to the maid bath, but Lloyd protests, telling her he can bathe himself. Sylpha doesn't want to let him out of her sight because she'll only find him under a pile of books. Lloyd is disappointed he doesn't get to read his book, but the other maids tell him the library demon will gobble him up if he remains stubborn. Lloyd is surprised there's a library with a forbidden demon. The maids recount the tale of the demon named Grimoire, who also destroyed the kingdom a long time ago. It took several stages to seal the demon away in a book. Sylpha thinks the story is a fairy tale because she can't believe there's a book in the castle's underground library where the monster is sealed. Sylpha doesn't think Lloyd will be scared by such a tale, but she's surprised to see him trembling. The maids offer to sleep with him through the night, but Sylpha tells them she's the only one that can perform that role. An argument ensues between the maids, and Lloyd uses that opportunity to sneak away. The idea of a forbidden underground library in the castle makes his eyes sparkle with anticipation. Lloyd goes underground, and he uses a concealment spell to get through the guards guarding the entrance. The guards argue about the authenticity of the tale behind the library as Lloyd sneaks past them. They're convinced no one will be able to sneak past them and break the seal cast by the 10 most powerful mages the kingdom has ever seen. Lloyd arrives at the barrier, and he breaks the seal easily. He enters into the library, and he can't believe he never knew such an exciting section existed underground. He moves through the library, checking out the books, and he reminds himself to put up the barrier when he's leaving. He settles down with a book when another book suddenly starts levitating, which surprises Lloyd. A demon emerges from the book, and he tells Lloyd he's impressed he was able to break the seal. Lloyd wonders who the demon is, and the demon introduces himself as Grimoire, and Lloyd figures out that he's the demon of the forbidden book. Lloyd introduces himself to Grimoire, and Grimoire tries to convince Lloyd to free him. He tells Lloyd his seal is already degraded and he'll eventually be free. He offers to give Lloyd as much gold as he wants if he frees him, but Lloyd isn't impressed with the demon's creation magic. He's disappointed Grimoire just molded some dust into gold, and he crushes the gold back into dust easily, which surprises Grimoire. Lloyd tells him he plans to replace his seal because he doesn't want a demon to destroy his plans of learning the magic of the kingdom. Grimoire tries to convince him that he has no beef with the citizens because the sages who sealed are long gone, but Lloyd doesn't believe him. Grimoire becomes desperate and he offers to teach Lloyd some ancient magic which has been lost to time. This piques Lloyd's interest, and Grimoire tells him he will teach him because he can see he has a lot of magic talent. Lloyd remembers the words of the prince who said magic would never smile on him because he's a commoner. He's now convinced he has a body more privileged in magic than a mere commoner. He decides to release the demon seal, and the demon can't believe his luck. Lloyd anticipates the teachings of the demon, and the demon decides to keep his word. He immediately strikes Lloyd with an ancient flame, and he decides to move on with his escape, thinking he has taken Lloyd down. He's surprised to see Lloyd safe and sound because he uses a barrier to protect himself. Lloyd is intrigued by the spell cast by the demon, and he asks the demon to show him more. The demon is pissed by this, and he hits Lloyd with more powerful ancient magic spells, but none of them can penetrate through Lloyd's barrier. The demon is baffled by this, and he wonders what Lloyd's barrier is made of. Lloyd is so fascinated by the magic that he decides to try it for himself. He takes the remnants on his barrier and he holds it on finger so he can observe its composition. He excitedly awaits what more Grimoire can offer when suddenly Grimoire grows a second mouth and starts chanting. Lloyd notices his double incantation to release a devastating ancient spell. Lloyd analyzes the spell from within his barrier, but Grimoire can't believe Lloyd is still alive after being on the receiving end of his most powerful spell. Grimoire decides to put his tail between his legs and run for his life, but he's stopped by a barrier. Lloyd informs him that he put up a barrier, but Grimoire is hurt that Lloyd thought he was trying to run away. He tells Grimoire he just put up the barriers as a preventive measure. Grimoire had had enough with Lloyd, so he decides to finish him off, but Lloyd tells him he already knows his spell. Lloyd decides to test Grimoire's defensive magic, and he casts a huge spell. Grimoire can't believe Lloyd has such a huge mana reservoir. He tries to dodge the fire spell, but he's inevitably burnt to a crisp. Lloyd wonders why Grimoire wasn't able to dodge his attack, and Grimoire can't believe he's so arrogant. Lloyd decides to repair the damage to the library, and Grimoire is dumbfounded because he was able to restore the room so perfectly. He decides to treat Lloyd with respect since he's so amazing. Lloyd knows the demons can't be taken out with magic, so he decides to test Grimoire's limits, but Grimoire moves away from him with dread. He decides to surrender himself and pledge his services to Lloyd. He asks to serve as Lloyd's familiar, and Lloyd immediately agrees, but Grimoire feels like Lloyd sees him as a lab rat. Lloyd tells him he stands out too much, and he asks him to transform into something smaller. Grimoire transforms into a little cute demon with the aim of buttering Lloyd up, so he can take him down unawares. Lloyd invites him to jump into his coat, and Grimoire can't believe Lloyd is so stupid that he'll let him get intimate. He decides to use the opportunity to attach himself to Lloyd and take over his body, but as soon as he touches Lloyd, he's surprised by how dense Lloyd's mana is. He decides to be obedient to Lloyd because he can't see himself taking control of him. Lloyd uses the opportunity to read all the books in the Forbidden Library. Thanks for watching. Want next episode? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.